Hops Cryo Pop Up webinar event. We are very excited for all of you to join us today and to learn more about this supercharged blend, Cryo Pop Up Original Blend, and also the groundbreaking research behind it, which is focused on bridging the gap between raw hop aroma and finished beers. We have a great program of speakers with us today, including Yakima Chief Hops Brewing Innovations team, Spencer Tiekelmeyer, and also some special guest speakers from North Brewing and also Black Stack Brewing. So we're very excited to go ahead and dive into this. We will be directing all questions into the chat comments on our YouTube Live, and we'll be directing those to our speakers at the conclusion of the webinar. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started.
Yakima Chief Hops has pioneered the use of cutting-edge hop lab analysis techniques to further unlock the maximum potential of aroma hops. This unique profiling technology was created by the Yakima Chief Hops R&D lab team to explore the aroma potential of novel hop compounds, specifically those that survive into finished beer. This next-gen data was used to engineer a hop pellet that maximizes the synergies between impactful aromatic components, monoterpene alcohols, esters, and polyfunctional thiols. The result is Cryo Pop Blend, a supercharged pellet that provides brewers with a dynamic solution for many applications, showing massive tropical, stone fruit, and citrus aromas.
All right, Spencer, go ahead and take it away from here.
Thanks, Tony Lynn. I appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. My name is Spencer Tiekelmeyer, and I'm the East Division Lead and Brewing Innovations Lead for Yakima Chief Hops. I'm a former brewer, and I work very heavily with our customers in the global markets and also with our Brewing Innovations team back in Yakima. And I've spent roughly 2.5 years working on this CryoPop project, which is we've sort of reached the apex of here. So I'm really excited to talk to you about this today because it really is a long time coming. I'm also really excited to be joined by some very esteemed colleagues here. Sam, Alex, and Seb from North Brewing in the UK in Leeds, and Murph Johnson from Black Stack. These are folks that have used CryoPop and are familiar with it, so we're going to get a chance to discuss with them today. Before we do that, though, I'm just going to give a quick introduction to the project and the product itself, and give a little bit of background on why we chose to go down this path, why we found it compelling, and why we thought it would be compelling to brewers worldwide. So what allowed us to do this is one of the Yakima Chief core tenets in our pride statement is an emphasis on continuous improvement. So new product development is kind of always at the forefront of what we do. So the things that allowed us to do this is really some of our sensory staff, lab and lab personnel and equipment, which have allowed us to pursue a project like this, which in previous years we wouldn't have been able to do. So we've made significant investments in both personnel on the sensory and lab fronts and new lab equipment, such as a GC QTOF and a GC SCD, all of which have allowed us to pursue this kind of what we would call next-gen hop research. So pushing the research that's been done in the past into the future and pushing it specifically into practical terms for our brewers out into the market. You can go ahead and advance to the next slide, Tony Lynn. As I mentioned, what really allows us to do this is our R&D lab. These folks are located in our Yakima campus and have been responsible for the creation of the survivables research, which we'll discuss in just a moment. One of the other things that we're actually really proud of and able to really leverage in the creation of CryoPop too is our grower network. And that's something that brewers might not always think of when they're thinking about what it takes to create a really novel, innovative product. But being able to flex the muscle of what we believe is the most sophisticated grower network in the world is a huge advantage in the creation of this project. We take in about 40 million pounds of bales per year. What that has allowed us to do is not just select an individual variety for the potential of a blend, but also specific lots of bales that are going to make the highest impact in a new product. So All of these things combined together, lab, sensory, and grower network, have allowed us to have the foundation necessary for creating a product like CryoPop. You can go forward to it. So this slide is probably the most, I would say, impactful of anything that we've done in the past couple of years. This is something that we've just kind of casually internally called the survivables graph, or the survivables chart. That name sort of caught on, and it's sort of just stuck with the graph. Originally, this was intended to be something that was more of an internal reference point. It was not something that we thought we would be actively publishing for brewers, not something that we necessarily thought would have such wide-ranging applicability, but it did. The more we put it in front of brewers, the more we found that it really resonated, and it really spoke to brewers on a practical level about practical insights on recipe design. So it's been a little bit of, I would say, the keystone of the research behind CryoPop. And I'm not going to spend a tremendous amount of time going into this today. We actually have several webinars that go into this graph in detail if anybody would like to view them after the fact. But what we're essentially looking at here is a graph that ranks varietals based on concentrations of beer-soluble compounds. What I mean by beer-soluble compounds is, broadly speaking, there are many compounds in hops, over 1,000 different compounds in hops. What we know is that a lot of those don't survive into beer. In fact, the vast majority of them don't tend to survive into beer. And hop science has tried for a lot of years to really dial in what each of those individual components does in beer, and that's been with some limited success, I would say. What we've done here is utilize the GC-QTOF and the SCD to really allow us to hone in specifically on finished beer analysis. So what we were able to do is, looking at a lot of different hoppy beers analytically, what we saw was that a consistent group of compounds was showing up over and over. And it wasn't some of the big ones that we see in raw hop analysis, like the hydrocarbon groups such as myrcene and things like that. What we saw was this consistent group, which is a mixture of monoterpene alcohols such as geraniol and linalool, soluble esters, sulfur-bearing compounds such as 3-mercaptahexanol, and ketone 2-nonanone. And this grouping, as I mentioned, was something that we began to look at because what we assumed was, if it's surviving into finished beer, it's likely to be the group of components that's making the highest impact in finished beer aroma. So rather than looking at that group of 1,000 compounds and trying to figure out what each of them does, we decided to work backwards from this group and look backwards at individual raw hop varieties within the framework of this group of survivable compounds. So they're called survivables because they tend to survive the brewing process, right? They tend to survive heat, they tend to survive fermentation activity, and they tend to be able to make it in meaningful concentrations into finished beer. So what that allows us to do is look at individual varieties within that context and say to ourselves, okay, this variety is high in this, low in this, and therefore we're able to make more educated statements about where we feel like that hop can do its best work in beer, so to speak. So I'm always careful to make sure that brewers don't oversimplify this graph and consider it sort of the end-all be-all of hop aroma. We feel like this is a very important next step in hop research, but it's important to note that what this graph really describes is where a hop can probably make its best impact in beer, timing-wise. So should it be in the whirlpool? Should it be in the active firm dry hop? Should it be in post firm dry hop? What it doesn't really describe is the quality of aroma present, right? So just because Mosaic is higher than Simcoe, for example, does not mean necessarily Mosaic is better. It just means that it has higher concentrations of individual compounds and may suit and may be better suited to a different hop timing than Simcoe. So speaking in really broad strokes, the practical way that we advise brewers kind of utilize this graph is we tend to recommend that hops that are higher up on the graph, so further towards the left, make better candidates for use early in the brewing process than hops later on down the graph. And I say that second part of the statement, than hops later on down the graph, because just because Idaho 7 is high up on the graph doesn't mean that it can only be used in whirlpool. It can be used very much, very successfully in post-firm dry hop. However, Idaho 7, based on looking at the graph, is probably more likely to be a more impactful whirlpool hop based on its component concentrations than something like Cascade or Izaka, for example. Now, what I would say as a caveat to that is, we know that Cascade and Azacca are great varieties, right? So this is not intended to be a good-bad graph. What it does tell us, though, is because Cascade and Azacca are further on down the graph and lower in beer-soluble compounds or survivable compounds, what that means is for Azacca or Cascade to make its highest impact in beer, they're most likely to find that success later on in the brewing process, such as post-ferm dry hop. The reason for that is they're not as high in things that can survive heat or can survive fermentation activity, can survive into the finished product through the antagonistic forces during brewing processes. So once again, the graph itself is intended to kind of help brewers understand where each individual variety can make its highest impact in their brewing process, not so much as intended to be these are good and these are bad, more of a measure of where a hop can make its highest impact. And the reason why it's worth going over this in this particular webinar, today's webinar is about CryoPop, but this is the foundation of what allowed us to build CryoPop. And that's the reason why we feel like it's so impactful and so meaningful to talk to brewers about, is it's this type of beer solubility research that allowed us to basically say, okay, we have all these theories based on this graph. How do we put them into a practical use? How do we bring them to their highest impact? And what we immediately centered upon was creating a blend of hops that basically allowed us to very, very selectively choose individual lots of bales to make the highest synergistic component concentrations that we could. So what you'll see the Tri-2-304 blend on here, that's actually the beta name of CryoPop. So when you see those two names, you can consider them equivalent. And what we see is that it achieved what we were hoping for, which is a high degree of balance between all 7 of these components. That's ultimately what we were going for. We want the compounds to be elevated in this blend, and we want them to be able to be interacting with one another. There's a lot of research that suggests that, compounds such as geraniol and linalool, and a few others, when they interact together, they actually have a higher sensory impact than they would as individual components. So the sum is greater than the parts, so to speak. So that's what we were going for in the creation of CryoPop, is how do we put all these beer soluble research theories into the most practical, useful product possible? And that's what where this product was born. So you can move forward, Tony Lynn. So once again, the blend at its original state was called Tri-2-304, which is a beta name. We tested this product for about 2 years prior to releasing it, because we really wanted to prove out. At the beginning, this is pretty cutting edge research, and at the beginning we wanted to prove out, like, do these theories actually play out like we think they will? At the beginning we weren't sure that they would. What we found, there's some beers here on the screen, of some customers that did try this out. The folks on this call have also used this product extensively at this point. And what we found is that when we put this product in front of brewers, particularly just under its beta name, we made about 4,000 pounds of it in its first year. We found that brewers tended to respond very well to it, and it seemed to perform like we thought it would. It seemed to be a high impact solution for delivering high amounts of beer soluble compounds into beer. So you see some examples of that on screen here, and beers that were very successful in market. Those were some of the proof of concept that we needed to move forward with this product and feel confident that it was going to be a solution for brewers worldwide. You can move forward, Tony Lynn. So the next slide, this is a study that we did to kind of attempt to illuminate exactly what we thought would be going on with this blend, right? So as I described, it's not just the component concentrations of each of these survivable compounds within the blend. It's actually sort of the balance between them that we feel like is what's helping this product, what we're calling a supercharged blend of beer soluble compounds, deliver high impact in beer. And so what this study that you're looking at on screen here is basically showing is, this is a trial in which we brewed 5 beers, 5 identical hazy IPAs. One was brewed with the blend itself in its pre-made format, and the other 4 were brewed with each of the individual constituent components of the blend, but fermented separately from one another. And what we did was fermented all of those separately, and after the fact, we blended those beers back together in the same proportions as the pellet blend itself, and carbonated that beer and compared it in sensory analysis versus the beer that was brewed with the blend by itself. As confusing as that is to say, basically you have the component parts blended together versus the beer fermented with all the blend components in concert together. So fermented separately versus fermented together. What we found here, the sensory results were extremely interesting and compelling was that unfortunately, I think the lines are actually backwards on the graph below. But the red line is actually the blend itself. And what we found is that the blend itself is actually presented much higher incidence in sensory analysis of stone fruit, berry, sweet, aromatic, and floral, which are 4 key categories for us when we're looking at potential sensory indicators that can make a high impact in finished beer. What we also found was that the specific call-outs that the sensory panelists gave of the individual minor descriptors, peach, pineapple, strawberry, guava, mango, orange. I kind of couldn't draw that up any better if I just drew it up myself. It's that really nails the profile of sort of what we feel like is going to make an impact for brewers worldwide right now in sort of that juicy, hazy IPA space. All of those sort of tropical and citrus components were exactly what we were hoping to demonstrate in the blend. And so we believe that the significantly superior performance in this trial was actually the result of those components being fermented together rather than being fermented separately. And we feel that this trial sort of proves that theory out. You can move forward, Tony Lynn. So to look at it just in a more simple format, these are 2 beers brewed with the blend as it just in two different hop timings. And that's one of the things that we feel like is most dynamic about this product is that it can be used in multiple situations for different impacts. So what we found is that a beer, 2 beers brewed identically except for a different hop timing, same dosage rates and everything. The beer that was fermented with active fermentation dry hops, the major indicators were peach, pineapple, strawberry, whereas the post-fermentation was peach and grapefruit. And I would say, anecdotally speaking, whenever I've tried myself beers that are brewed with both of these, the active fermentation dry hop tends to produce a big, round, smooth and creamy sort of tropical fruit profile, whereas the post-fermentation dry hop tends to produce kind of a brighter, spritzier, sort of bolder profile. So once again, we feel like from a sort of adding layers of dynamic flavor perspective, that the product can be used in really many dynamic ways as sort of a Swiss Army knife to deliver these really bold flavors. So there's a lot of reasons to be sort of bullish on its utility in that way. So you can move forward, Tony Lynn. So in summary, that's kind of a primer on the research and where it came from. What we are ultimately talking about here is a cryo blend that is designed to deliver the maximum amount of beer-soluble compounds into a finished product. And if you only remember one thing from the webinar, that's really the takeaway: is a supercharged blend of beer-soluble hop compounds. Designed to be a dynamic solution for juicy, fruit-forward, highly aromatic applications, showing massive tropical stone fruit and citrus aromas. And so that's what True 304 has become. And through the 2 years of research and development and product testing, we felt confident that this was a product that we felt that brewers would add value to beers worldwide. And so we've decided to release it here and did so on Tuesday of last week. So you can move forward, Tony Lynn. So one of the reasons that we feel so excited about this product is we do feel like it has a very broad range of applications, and that the audience or the type of brewer that might utilize it is really dynamic. We do strongly feel that it has applications for both novice and expert brewers alike. For novice brewers, and I say novice, but that may mean just somebody who's not been brewing hazy IPAs for a long time. It could be a very experienced brewer who's looking to jump into that market. We believe that this could be a go-to solution for all sort of juicy, hazy, fruit-forward beers. Because of the high concentrations of impactful components, we believe that a brewer who's producing rotating IPAs every week could use this as 40 to 60% of every IPA they make, and then layer other hops on top of it to add dynamism. It produces such a gorgeous canvas of fruit flavor that it could be that go-to solution for brewers. And once again, a brewer maybe who's kind of new to producing hazy IPA or these kind of fruit forward IPA styles, this could be a user-friendly solution to help them make what I would just call market relevant beer. So, to kind of get them into that space. For expert brewers, those who are really dialed into some of these more, analytical sides of brewing, this could be for a brewer who's really focused on maximizing concentrations of individual hop compounds. So, for example, if there's a brewer out there that's like, I really need to jack up the linalool content of this beer, or I really need to get the 3MH high in this beer, this blend could serve that purpose for them because of its specificity in its component concentrations. And I think maybe the most important thing that this blend does is it's the next step forward. And I wouldn't say that we've cracked the code necessarily, but it's the next step forward in helping us understand how to bridge the gap between raw hop aroma and finished beer aroma. One of the most common bits of feedback that we get from brewers is, this hop that I'm smelling in pellet format or in whole cone format smells amazing, but when I put it in my beer, it doesn't translate that way. How do I know what's going to translate and what isn't? This blend helps us bridge that gap. And it is definitely a huge leap forward in that understanding, because what we are, instead of looking at it from a raw hop analysis standpoint, we're looking at it from a beer impact standpoint and working backwards. And we do really feel that that's what's going to help brewers moving forward make better beer, is understanding solubility characteristics and being able to work backwards from there in recipe design, rather than trying to smell a hop on the table and figure out what's going to translate and what isn't. We're meshing those concepts together to help brewers make what we feel like is have an easier time making great beer. So you can move forward, Tony Lynn. So just to finish up here, this product is a new product family for us. Unlike some of our other blends, like community blends, which are designed to support a cause worldwide, or expression blends, which are designed to match an existing profile, such as Pacific Crest was really designed to match a Czech Saaz-like profile. These are neither of those things. These blends are literally just designed for high flavor and aroma impact. So we're calling them flavor blends. And I say with an S, a plural, because CryoPop is our original blend, is really what we feel like is our first foray into this. But we do believe that this will eventually be a product family that will actually be built out with a couple more blends that have distinct profiles from one another. So we currently have 2 other trial blends in the pipeline that we're working on right now that are designed to hit differentiated profiles from the Cryo blend. We feel like Cryo Pop Original is kind of the dead center of what brewers are looking for these days. Huge pineapple, peach, stone fruit, and citrus. And the other blends in our product family that we're working on are intended to be sort of complementary features of those of other flavors that brewers commonly ask for in beer and have a hard time achieving. So ultimately, what we feel like this is going to allow brewers to do is have very, very specific tools in their toolbox. If they're looking for very specific flavor profiles and dynamic solutions to allow them to hit those, this flavor blends family is going to allow brewers to have that at their disposal to to give them more insight and specificity into the raw materials they're using. So you can move on. So that's it for just the quick introduction there. A little longer than I hoped it would be, but and as I mentioned, we do have a couple of webinars on our website that go deeply into that concept of beer solubility and survivability. If there's anybody out there that would like to check that out, you can find that on our YouTube page or on our blog. But with that, as I mentioned, we have some esteemed colleagues on here today. Some from across the Atlantic, over in the UK, from North Brewing. We've got Sam, Alex, and Seb from North Brewing. Hey guys.
Yeah.
And Murph Johnson from Blackstack in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And so thanks guys for joining us today. Yeah, happy to have you guys on, particularly as you guys are sort of the front lines of some of this product development, right? You guys have been using some of this product for as far back as a year and a half, back when it was just a beta product, and we were just kind of testing out some of these theories. So what I'm hoping to do today is for us to be able to kind of share conversationally with the group some of your experience and some of your kind of concepts of why you find this product compelling. So I guess Sam, Alex, and Seb, I would ask you first off, maybe you can just kind of describe how you've used it so far, the types of beers that you've utilized it in, and sort of what your thought process was as you introduced it into those products.
Sure. Yeah, we've mostly used it in hazy IPAs, obviously. We've kind of slotted it into our fairly kind of standard recipe and used end of fermentation as you described. And I think I definitely echo the the strawberry and kind of soft fruit flavors. I think that's what really kind of jumped out to me. Yeah, that kind of strawberry thing. I mean, Sam, maybe you want to talk more about the kind of precise processes we did.
Yeah, sure. I think we first got hold of the hop, I think it was in July last year. And we, again, brewed it into a sort of a fairly standard base recipe for our sort of core range New England IPA sort of style beers. And on that brew, we only used the hop at that point as an end of firm dry hop. So I think we used about 20 kilos in, I think, a batch size of about 2,700 litres. But we were super impressed with that one, and the way that beer came out, we were very happy with, and got a lot of really positive feedback from it. So when it came to using the hop again this time round, we sort of wanted to see what it would do using it across every single range of the brew day. So we used typically in our New England sort of style beers, we'll keep the bittering hops either like at the start of boil, we'll keep them either very low or at 0, which is what we did on this brew. We didn't use any actual initial bittering hops. And then we used a small charge. So we only used 8 kilos into 51 hex at 80 degrees, which is a fairly standard sort of New England method for us here at North Brew Co. And then we split the dry hop. So we did 20 kilos end of ferment. And then we did an additional 15 once the beer had been cold crashed. And we partnered it up on this occasion with some Citra as well. Just to try and get the full range of flavors available from the hop, and then also sort of just see how it partnered up with Citra, as it's a fairly sort of, again, it's a widely used hop by us at North, and especially in our sort of New England styles as well.
Yeah, excellent. And just for the audience to clarify too, this is a beer that's actually available on market right now. If you want to kind of shout out the name real quick. There you go. Beautiful can.
Cryo Pop.
Yeah, excellent. So yeah, that for those that are in the UK, that is a beer that's actually on market right now and is available if you'd like to try it. But yeah, I think you bring up one of the points that I feel is like one of the maybe the most applicable use cases of CryoPop in sort of in relation to using it with Citra. We have 3 main use cases that we describe as a potential, ways to utilize the blend. One is as a single hop, since it is already pre-blended with individual varieties, it really can make a compelling single hop beer. One of the others, though, is actually to use it as sort of a booster for other hops, right? Because it's you've got familiar hops like Citra, Simcoe, Mosaic, because it is sort of synergistically loaded with these things that tend to be boosters, like particularly linalool and geraniol. We do feel that it can be used in concert, maybe 40% of your hop bill with some of these other more familiar varieties to sort of elevate those varieties and maybe like make your Citra more Citra, so to speak, and that is a really, I think a very useful way to do it, is sort of as maybe like a chef would use salt, right, to sort of amplify the flavor in beer. So that's it's I think a very compelling way to use it, and I guess for you guys too, did you feel like that second treatment, the way that you did it when you created this bigger beer, this bigger batch that's currently available on market, did you feel like it performed similarly, differently, or in a way, like, do you have any kind of insight on how you felt like it did this time around?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as you pointed out earlier, I think in general, we notice quite a big difference, obviously, between end of fermentation and post fermentation. I think, as you said, you can tend to get that juicier, rounder, more blended flavor, which was true for these hops as well, I think. So I think, yeah, we maybe it was a little bit. I think we like that flavor in general, don't we, Sam and Alex, of the mix of post fermentation and the during fermentation. So yeah, a little bit more complex, maybe a little bit less kind of juicy and a bit more kind of bit more of that citrus and pininess. So yeah, I think we like that. I mean, like I said earlier, I think I picked up a few more of those kind of delicate fruity flavors this time around, and maybe didn't quite translate through to the finished can. So it'd be interesting to experiment with that more in the future and to see if we could get some of that kind of real kind of strawberry stuff that I was tasting in the tank, and see if we can get that translate into can. I think that'd be nice. But also it was quite creamy as well, wasn't it, Sam? I think yeah, I noticed that on this particular batch.
I noticed a particular kind of coconut cream flavor coming through on that, which is one of those flavors that I definitely think amplifies the tropical kind of notes of these kind of beers that are coming through more. Yeah, sort of more spread, a bigger spectrum of tropical flavor.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, very cool. Murphy, how about you? You've used it quite a while ago when it was just in its infancy, and then are about to use it again in another beer. Do you want to describe how you guys have used it so far and kind of what your experience with it has been?
Yeah, absolutely. Process-wise, we don't do a ton of, well, we can get there. We went about a pound in the whirlpool, and then a pound around day 3. I don't have a ton of experience with post-fermentation dry hopping, just because the way that we handle things, everything, or all the hops are going in before the end of primary, and then we're capping to try and capture as much aroma and that sexy, natural, stanky CO2 as possible. But we hit it with a little bit of our citron mosaic at the end, because we know what we can expect from our lot. So it's kind of a picking away from that, I guess you could say. And I really like what you're talking about as kind of salt, or as a blender, because we spend a lot of time trying to fill out those oil profiles, but a lot of times that means that you're pulling in some stuff that you're not necessarily looking for. Like one that comes to mind pretty readily is Equinot, I'm not sure proper pronunciation, but in terms of making things just pop a little more. But a lot of times that can start to pull in this grassiness for me, where it's not necessarily, you end up getting a lot of undesirable characteristics when you're trying to just fluff up a certain part of it. So I think it makes a ton of sense, especially like definitely for people who are, haven't, not as well versed and haven't been digging in on this as much, where you're picking apart these oil compounds and kind of trying to build these. I think it makes an amazing solution just for, I don't want to say plug and play, because there's definitely still a learning curve in terms of how you're utilizing it and what you're looking for. But in terms of a tool and the amount of work that you guys have done, this is absolutely incredible. It's been awesome getting to play with it. I'm really, really excited to get into some more beer. That first one was phenomenal. I mean, obviously, Citron Mosaic, don't suck in their own. We can thank you guys for that portion as well. But I'd say the creaminess and this like a soft tropical that I just absolutely love about it, where it's fluffy, but it's this smooth, creamy, and round, I think is a great way of what you were saying earlier. Yeah, I absolutely loved it so far. I'm really excited to get into some more beer.
Very good. Yeah, I think that's it's really designed to be applicable in any stage of the brewing process, right? Because it has compounds that can survive heat, so it can be used in a full temp whirlpool. It can be used active firm. It can be used post firm. My favorite use case is active firm. I think that's the, or at least even if it's not fully like high Kreutzen, but like you guys said, Sam and Sebastian, with a few degrees Plato left to go, or sort of towards the tail end of fermentation, I feel like that little bit of sort of yeast activity, biotransformation, we do feel like is definitely a factor and a real part of what makes some of these beer soluble compounds so impactful. But in my opinion, we get a lot of brewers that ask us about biotransformation, and I think oftentimes for me, it's just about as much, it's just as much about the things that are sort of added or metabolized as it is about the things that are removed, actually. So I think there's certain varieties in the you know, in the world of brewing that don't make as nice and easy to use of post-firm dry hops as when but when they go into active firm, sort of the rough edges get smoothed out a little bit by sort of that interaction with yeast and some of the gassing off that happens. In the case of the Cryo Pop blend, I think you nailed it, Murph. It produces this big, round, sort of juicy and smooth character that I feel is so, I feel like on trend for today's sort of IPA production and everything like that. And that's what makes it, I feel like, really, really compelling. But likewise, what I generally encourage brewers to do is it doesn't have to be either or. Do both, you know, like and actually sort of layer those flavors and complexities on top of one another as you do multiple timings and multiple dosages. So yeah, it's very exciting. As far as you know, I think one of the things that makes me so encouraged about this project, like I said, I'm a former brewer. I brewed for about 10 years, and I don't recall ever having anything at my disposal for recipe design that was quite so practical or quite put such a fine point on different varietals and how to use them. So I guess I would love to have you guys, you know, the North guys, maybe speak first about how do you feel like this survivables research and sort of the concepts of solubility and things like that, how do you feel like it affects your headspace when you're designing a recipe, or does it change the way you look at things, or do you feel like it's helping you guys have a better understanding of where to go from here? I guess multiple questions there.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll go first now. I think the first thing I noticed looking at that graph you had there was centennial right at the end. And I was like, we found through you know, trial and error, you put a little bit of centennial in the dry hop, and you know it's there, don't you? It's like you know, it's really powerful. I mean, some of them surprised me a bit. Like I think Sabro, the fact that was kind of a bit further down, I thought that would have a lot more, because again, you put a little bit of that in and you kind of know about it. But yeah, no, I think it's a really interesting concept of, like you said, of analyzing what's in the finished beer instead of looking at what's in the raw. Like, because I always think, you know, it's rubbing hops, smelling hops. How do I know what's going to actually translate to the end of the beer? I mean, just exactly as you said. And if you go into select hops or whatever, you know, how do you know you're doing a good job? It's really hard. So yeah, I think that's an interesting concept to look at what actually is that in what compounds are in the beer, and how do we use that as recipe design. So it's yeah, I'll have to think on it a bit more, I think. But yeah, definitely. Sam, you got any thoughts on that one? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of agree and echo what you're saying. And quite often our approach when we get a sort of a new hop variety or something like this blend is we'll brew a single hop, and we'll see what the base, we'll use it at different points during the brew, and we'll taste it at each point and see what flavors we can pull out from that. And I think kind of going forward with the CryoPop blend and looking at those charts, it's going to be a case of like looking at, okay, like trying to partner it up with other hops that we know sort of will supplement those flavors based on those graphs. So I think it's going to be really interesting going forward. We've still got a small amount to play with, so we'll be looking at sort of partnering it up and seeing how it interacts with different varieties. I think it's going to be pretty fascinating.
How about you, Murph? You feel like it's kind of added some sort of practical tools to your recipe design headspace at all? And
I can't even tell you how many other brewers I've shown that. Yeah, I spent a lot of time with it, and I was like, or Steve, our rep, when he first showed it to me, I was like, holy shit, dude. Like, I was like, I spent like literally like probably half a day, and then I look at it all the fucking time. Sorry, sorry, but you guys
he's passionate about it.
Like, every time I bust it out, I'm like, dude, you got to see this shit. I like show the brewers, like, what? It's like this, like eyes blow out of their head shit. Like, yeah, it's been, I like, thank you guys so much for that alone, because holy shit, it's been so interesting just like diving in on that, and just having I'm a very visual person, so just having that to sort through instead of just looking at tables is so helpful in and of itself. And man, it's been so cool just going through there again. Like I was gonna say, like Sabra, I was like, holy shit, because 11 pounds of 60 barrel batch, and all of a sudden it's like boom, like it's there. but it's so cool digging through that. But then looking through and getting I'm just super excited to get my hands on more, because like you guys are saying, like running through doing it on its own, but getting it in post firm, but also just doing one-on-ones with all of our favorite hops and seeing where we land on all those. Just I think what we're starting to do, once we can get it consistently, we're going to start doing a series where it's just one-on-one, just because like you guys are saying, and I always get excited every time a new varietal comes out that we're super excited about. We have 3 1-barrel tanks, so we do a ton of small batch experimentation stuff, just to kind of get our bearings and see where we're at with it, and get a sense of what we want to do. But like you're saying with this, you guys did so much of that work for us, where I'm really just excited to get it rolling with like 50-50 with a lot of our favorite hops and the selected lots that we have, just to see. Like I have a feeling it's not going to suck, so just kind of rolling the dice and having fun with it.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that's really encouraging about it is, and like I said before, you kind of nailed it, Murph, which is we didn't really build it originally as a brewer tool. It wasn't like the original we didn't think that necessarily it would, but we kept putting it in front of brewers, and we kept getting that same reaction that you described, which is like, whoa, And the more we thought about it, the more we were like, this is really very practical and very user friendly, which is not something that we've ever really had a lot of in the hop industry before, in terms of research that brewers could immediately grasp and put to use today in the brewery, right? And hops are complex, I won't lie. I mean, doing analytics on hops is very difficult because they are super complex. But I think there's so much that we can kind of tease out of that graph and unpack from it that allows recipe design to just be that much more informed. And I hope that, in 2 to 3 years, we're light years beyond where we are right now, and we'll know even more. In the case of you guys mentioned Centennial, Sabro, I would also throw Talus in there. I think one of the common threads between those 3, where they all make a super outsized impact in beer, is super high geraniol content, which is just this very durable, very impactful compound that tends to be really prevalent in all 3 of those. I think those are actually our top 3 geraniol varieties. To put the cryo blend in contrast, or the CryoPop blend in contrast, though, Centennial in its case, though, is very dominated by that and one other compound, and not super well balanced with a bunch of others. So it tends to make this really highly impactful hop, but it tends to be very, very one-sided, right? And whereas the blend, we were really hoping to it's got some of this, some of this, some of this, some of this. So it's really well balanced between all of those things. But I think that's where the graph can really shine is, okay, so you've got Centennial here or Sabro that's hugely high in geraniol. So now what do you pair it with to make sure the linalool content is high up and the 3MH content is high up? That's where it just really becomes, I think, such an effective recipe design tool. And once again, it's only one side of the coin. It's measuring analytical, the totality of what's there. It's not measuring the quality of what's there, right? That's where sensory analysis of finished beer comes in. And so pairing those 2 things together, I feel like we can make some pretty rapid and valuable progress to help brewers. Because as you mentioned, Murph, brewers don't always have time every time a new variety comes out to do 10 different versions of a beer with it to figure out exactly where its sweet spot is in their beer, right? Brewers are making more beers than ever. They're busy. And so we consider it our job to help do some of that legwork so that brewers have at least an educated guess going into it of where it's going to make its best impact in their beer and where it's going to really shine. So I think that's what makes me so excited about it. So anyway, well, thank you guys for sharing. I do want to leave a little bit of time here for some Q&A, just so that we can make sure that folks in the audience have a chance to ask you guys questions. We do have one in the chat here that I'll go over right now. How are you able to compare rates of terpenes and then a thiol like 3-mercaptahexanol? That is surprising finding that 3MH would be similar in intensity concentration to linalool. That's a great question, and I would say that's definitely a deep dive on the analytics itself. I'll say just a short answer is right now the 2 are not displayed on an even scale on there. You'll notice that on the graph we don't have it on the side and necessarily in ppb or in ppm or anything like that. The reason for that is 3MH is minuscule by comparison in terms of its actual physical concentration in hops, but it's making this extremely outsized impact in finished beer aroma. So if we put everything in ppb, you wouldn't even be able to see the 3MH on the graph. So actually 3MH is listed in there as peak area count, rather than in ppb. Most of the rest of them are in ppb. What we hope to do by next year is to actually standardize a scale between all of the compounds present, so that you're actually looking at it in its same format. What it might involve is actually a multiplier for some of the small ones like 3MH, where we actually have to put in a star down at the bottom and say multiplied by 100 for visuals. But it's kind of a challenge because some of these compounds are literally minuscule and previously undetectable. If we didn't have the SCD and the QTOF, we would never have been able to see 3MH concentrations at all because they're just too small. But point being, though, I would take the graph for what it is right there, which is a visual representation of what's there. It is not there's no scale attached to it. So I wouldn't use it as like a mathematical calculation because that's not where it's at this point. So great question, though. Very, very deep dive. Hopefully whoever asked that question will have a chance to dig a little further. So. Tony,
while we give everyone a chance to put in their questions in the comments of the live chat on YouTube, I do want to point out that we have some additional resources on cryopopblend.com. There's a product overview sheet, a survivable compounds handbook, and a survivable compounds poster. And we will also be hosting a survivable compounds hop and brew school webinar on June 10th at 10 a.m. Pacific time. So these are some additional resources to make sure you're aware of as we move forward if you have more questions. Excuse me.
Yeah, and I think that's in that webinar too. I'm pretty excited. We'll have Pat, who's our R&D lab manager, and our sensory team on there as well to kind of describe in a little more detail some of the background work that we did to make this possible. I think, as I mentioned before, I really do feel like it's kind of the tip of the iceberg, and that we're at this point where I think we're going to rapidly advance in our understanding of some of these concepts. But as Murph has indicated, the initial results are exciting enough to just be pumped about even where we're at right now. So as you guys move forward with kind of designing recipes and using new varietals and stuff like that, what do you feel like is on the horizon for you? Like what in IPA sort of brewing technology or tactics is really exciting you right now? Maybe Murph, you want to start us off? Are there anything that's really stoking your coals as you're brewing IPAs right now?
Yeah, man, we've been having a ton of fun with playing with whirlpool temperatures and just dialing in between, because traditionally we've usually been foregoing, or for most of our hazy / New England style IPAs, we've been foregoing most of the kettle editions and then just going playing with whirlpool, how high we can go in there without picking up. But obviously you can only go so high if you're up above isomerization temperature. So we've been having a ton of fun. How far can we drop in and still be getting those oils? But we're having a lot of fun with racking onto hops. We've been doing that for a long time, but we just started playing around with the rates, like how high can we go? Are we actually, at what point are we just wasting hops? And found that it's pretty quick there, but but we've been having a ton of fun with that. Like, how early can we get it in without wasting a ton of beer? Thankfully, we have a nice, like, fucking 45-pound 6-inch butterfly valve, so we can dry hop during primary and not be worried about super dangerous situations coming up, because definitely had volcanoes in the past before we got that thing. Yeah, man, just finding as many nooks and crannies and how heavily we can go before we start having it suck.
I guess that is the target right there.
Yeah,
we did just have a question pop up here. Let's see. Can you share the targeted parameters for what the targeted parameters are for the blends on the horizon? Yeah, we can. So basically the two beta blends that we've got in the works right now are just called -M and -B. What we intended to do with those two was use this same research framework to really try to hone in on what we feel like are two very in-demand profiles that brewers often ask us for, and that individual varietals have a hard time hitting by themselves. So those in specific would be mango, sort of that very ripe mango flavor, which can be pretty ethereal and hard to target. and sort of the very specifically blueberry profile. That's one that we get common requests for. It's difficult to find just one variety that's going to hit that profile. So what we're basically doing is, once again, working backwards, looking at, particularly in this case, like soluble ester contents, and trying to figure out, can we sort of reverse engineer a blend that's going to allow those synergies to take place and hit those target profiles. At this time, like I say, they're just a beta project, so we don't quite know yet whether we've kind of nailed that or not. Early returns are quite good, but we hope that we can achieve that in the future, because once again, this is something that we ought to leverage. We ought to leverage this research for sort of the greater good. And some of these more difficult to hit profiles are I think where it can really shine, is helping us utilize particularly a lot of breeding stock too. One of the things that we've talked about a lot with our head breeder, Jason Peralta, is we have lots and lots of varieties in the breeding pipeline that may or may not ever make it to full commercialization for one reason or another, but they may have some very specific component concentration that's very intriguing, right? And if we can harness that genetic material as maybe not an individual standalone variety, but as a component to help us blend and make a more compelling blend, that is a real advantage that that genetic material can provide, even if it's maybe not something that would warrant full commercialization to use as a standalone variety. So I think there's a lot of legs there too. But so how about you guys from North? What's really been getting you pumped up lately, as you guys are kind of pushing ever into the frontiers of hoppy beers and things like that?
Well, I mean, I guess it's not brand new, but I really like Talus. I think that's really interesting hop. It's quite like a different kind of dimension, isn't it? I mean, yeah, it feels like it's bringing something new to the kind of Citra Mosaic kind of stable, as it were. So yeah, I think that's really nice. Yeah, just kind of some of those more unusual fruity, creamy, coconutty kind of flavors. I think, I mean, interesting what Mo was saying about whirlpool hops. Again, something we haven't really played with for a while, but then maybe looking again at kettle hopping and just seeing what that brings, I think is an interesting one. I think also just looking at where maybe IPAs will go post hazy IPA, if there is going to be such a thing. And I think there's we see quite a lot of renewed interest in kind of some of the older styles here in the UK. So slightly drier kind of West Coast styles, but yeah, like maybe drier, not so sweet, but also getting that kind of fruity, all the kind of good things you get with these modern hops as well. So I think that's where maybe I see us experimenting going a little bit in the future. Yeah, what Alex and Sam, have you got anything else to chuck in there?
Your description sounds a little bit like a New England kind of English ale. It's kind of blend, like super soft and fruity, but kind of more traditional and slightly more bitter. So maybe with a kind of mountain IPA blend of West Coast and New England. But I guess like we've got some recently sort of expanded our brewery. We've got some new equipment. We sort of whirlpooled in our old brewery in our kettle, but now we have a dedicated whirlpool vessel. So I guess we're sort of finding our feet with that a little bit more and figuring out some sort of how to utilize that within our brewing process.
Yeah, that's exciting, and I it's Seb, as you mentioned, the kind of the ever sort of evolving shape of hoppy beer, right? People love hops and they love sort of different dimensions of it. You bring up something too that I think is a really interesting feature of the blend. I mean, I would be kind of remiss to make it just sound like it's only applicable to hazy production, but we've actually produced quite a few West Coast IPAs with it and pale ales and sort of the more clear and bitter and dry side of the spectrum. And it absolutely can perform in that space. And that's one of the things that makes me excited too, because I pretty much love hops in all formats. But yeah, I do sometimes miss, dry and bitter and crisp. And I think it can kind of toe that line of making a sort of the juicy but not hazy kind of end of the spectrum, which is producing all these sort of gorgeous citrus and tropical flavors, but in a format that's lower finishing gravity, higher BU, things like that. And I think it can really shine in that space too. I think that's what makes me sort of most excited about it as a brewing tool is that it is really dynamic and can be used in all of those many varied situations. But yeah, so yeah, very cool. Well, Tony Lynn, I'm not sure if we have any more questions, but if not, we might kind of wrap up here with the guys and give everybody a quick thank you.
Yeah, fantastic insights, everyone. We really appreciate everyone attending and joining us today for this Cryo Pop-Up webinar. We look forward to seeing what you all brew up and how you experience this new blend. So thank you all for joining and have a wonderful day.
Thank you guys so much for doing all this, putting this together for the research for 2.5 years. Holy shit. Been very thankful for everything.
Yeah, thank you ever so much. It's been really nice to be involved in everything around the Cryo Pop sort of project as well. So yeah, thank you. It's been really good.
Well, thank you guys. We can't do it without you, and ultimately, it really keeps us excited to go to work every day to make sure that you guys have the right tools and everything like that. And we can't wait to see more of it. So, and fingers crossed that we'll be able to see you guys in person soon and share a Cryo Pop beer together. So anyway, take care, everybody, and thanks again for everything. We'll talk to you guys soon. Oh, and one last thing that I'll mention before we close. If anybody would like any more resources on this, we have it. And also you can email brewinghelp@yakimachief.com for any brewing related questions. That's a help desk that's staffed by about 6 former brewers on staff with us. So please utilize that if we can answer any questions for you. And thanks everybody for attending.
Is this video going to be online? They posted it to our story, but not to our actual fucking feed. So I was gonna post the webinar retroactively. If there's a spot I can access it.
Yes, this will be on our YouTube channel.
Perfect. Okie dokie. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody.
Thanks guys. Have a good day.
Hey, in September, let's make some beer. Fuck with that whirlpool, baby. All right. See you later.
See you.